Alright, so for this video, I am feeling less resistance, almost feeling a little nervousness. I don't know where that's coming from, but anyways, the last video, if you noticed, I was definitely feeling resistant from the beginning of that. I had a buildup of resistance and, had been treading water for some time, just kind of releasing as I go, but never really feeling like that complete let go, that complete freedom was experienced. So I had been kind of going through a little bit of a funk, you could say, in the last few months. I definitely have not felt entirely myself. Normally, I guess what was different is just there was this lack of joy. I don't know, some essence, some zeal of life that was missing. It was like I'm going through all the motions, doing all the things, but something's missing. And having had just gone through a breakup last year, it's kind of to be expected to some degree. It's normal. And I noticed that I also didn't want to let myself go into go down that road of trying to replace that person with someone else to fill that void, but to really figure out where's that void coming from and what is it that really is lacking for me to experience that deeper fulfillment and that deep sense of joy and that just natural buoyancy. Now, I've had my moments, sure, up and down. Like I said, I've been doing my best, but I could tell there was something missing. I was something a little bit off, and it just actually turned itself around recently. So I wasn't necessarily planning on going there in this video. This is more about resistance, but I think we're going to see how it all relates in the end. The main thing is, the main premise to keep in mind, as I talked about before, is that energy minus resistance equals capacity. So whatever it is that we're trying to create or do or express or become or live in our lives, whatever it is, we're going to need to have the capacity to do it. We're going to certainly need energy to do it because all work requires energy. All fun requires energy. Any kind of movement requires energy of some kind. So whether even if it's creating ideas, the movement of thought requires energy. So, and our energy at its maximum is what we call our capacity. So you'll call it max capacity. It's kind of redundant. Max capacity just means that our capacity has been met, and we are filled to the brim. So, at any time, if we are at full capacity, then we will have access to the total amount of energy that is available that we are able to contain. All right, so where the resistance comes in is the quality or characteristic that limits that energy as it enters the system. So we have on one end energy coming in to the system or being created at a cellular level, however we want to look at this. The energy is coming into the system and it's encountering a certain degree of resistance. And whatever that resistance is, it will directly and proportionately limit our capacity. And remember, our capacity equals our ability to execute, our ability to perform, whatever it is, our ability to transform, our ability to grow. Anything that we want to do. This all entails our ability and capacity. So anyway, so we can see that if there's a direct relation between capacity and energy, and that connection in our most innermost direct felt experiential, contact with it is resistance. We could say, well, that thing's a limiting factor in my life. And then we go about trying to fix the external circumstances that are the limiting factors. And certainly that's going to be part of the process. Anytime we're trying to create on an external level, we're going to encounter obstacles. But this is more about the inner quality with which we meet those obstacles. Do we see them as enemies? And do we build up, this aggression towards them, or are we feeling defeated or overwhelmed by them, like on an emotional level? Because that's the type of resistance that I'm talking about. Now, we can't control the external worlds, but that's the beauty of this whole process of obtaining inner fulfillment, is that it's non-dependent on what the external world is doing. We begin to experience that directly more and more as we practice it. So either way, whether we need to change things on an external level in order to meet our goals, or we're just encountering inner resistance, either way, we're going to increase our capacity by letting go of that resistance. So even if we are working on things on an external level, in other words, we got to move things around. We got to convince this person to do that. We're gonna need a certain capacity to do it. And if we're coming at them like they're an enemy and an obstacle, they're gonna feel that. They're gonna push back against us and become an obstacle. Whereas if we don't have that resistance, we're much more likely to engender a friend or a compadre, or to have that community effort, that sense of we're working together towards something, because that's where the greater power comes in. We know this. We know there's greater power when all the forces are working together and flowing in harmony. We know that. However, resistance is a fact of life, and we're going to encounter it, and how we deal with it will directly determine our experience of life. Now, back to our story. So I woke up yesterday morning and I had a little bit of the blahs again, and it's just become kind of normal at this point. It was the end of winter here too, so the seasonal affective disorder build-up kind of thing. I'm at the tail end of it, of lack of sun and things, so particularly susceptible to this sort of thing on an environmental level. It's good to know all the factors, because otherwise we could think there's just something wrong with me, But sometimes you just feel like the blah, sometimes you just need a little sun. It's be that simple. But nonetheless, and yesterday was a particularly sunny day, so I was blessed with that. But this was before I'd seen the sun. I was just laying in my bed, just kind of feeling blah. I had my dog there with me, thank God. Giving me the look. It's time to go out, Bob. You got to get your shit together. Let's do this. And I started thinking about, how much I love that dog, that I would get up and take him out even when it's raining, because he likes to go out on walks. It's not enough to just tie him up in the back or whatever, even though that would suffice his need. But what he really enjoys is going out. I thought about that, and I thought about, started thinking about too, the feeling, what's been missing in my life. What is it I'm trying to put my finger on that? What is that quality that's lacking? That's, where is it coming from? So I can fix it, so I can understand it, and, transform it, grow beyond it, become aware of it. Most pertinently and paramount of all is just becoming aware of it, because the awareness itself is what does all the work. When we become aware of something, we can no longer ignore it. We use denial and things like that, but eventually, if we're trying to build our consciousness and trying to become more and more aware, we're not going to continue to deny ourselves these obvious truths as they come up in our awareness. So that is the critical thing, is just awareness. People are always trying to figure out, what do I do once I become aware of this resistance? Well, the main thing is just become aware. You'll start to have insights and everything directly just as a result of that opening in your consciousness. So anyway, so I was thinking about it, and I remember, just squeezing my girlfriend, and I like just chasing her down and things like that. And I started to feel, it's like that is one thing that's missing. I poured so much love into our relationship and into that person that there was that constant outpouring of love towards her. And so that was no longer happening in my life. I realized that that spigot had been sort of shut down because I didn't have another, object of even I'm being facetious, of course, but I didn't have that external object of love to pour my love out into in that way. And so that was cut off. And I realized that part of me was thinking, how am I going to replace that? How am I going to, find another source? I don't want to say source. It's not the right, but object isn't, I don't know. Words are weird. All right. So anyways, we're doing our best. Another object of that affection. That's what it is. Okay. And then, so I realized instantly, it's no, you need to be that object of affection for yourself. And you haven't been being that object of affection for yourself, going through this transitional time and, dealing with a lot of emotions and things. That you've been doing your best for sure, but you have not been pouring that love forth for yourself. And, you haven't been getting it from her. So it's like you stopped the flow in both directions. Or that's, that was the result of the lack of awareness of that area during this transition. And instantly that awareness of that and that recognition just opened my heart. And it started that flowing out into myself. And it just it just was so simple and obvious, and it changed everything. And I mean, I opened the door. I'm taking the dogs on the walk. It's a beautiful sunny day, and I mean, I'm just feeling the glory of this incredible warmth, this pre-spring day, this magical gift that we got, and it's just the woods are silent and just there's just a quality of like I don't know, there was a reverence for it. It just felt so auspicious, and it was directly, I could see it was a result of having been withholding my love from myself, the world at large, consciousness, um, and the recognition of that and caused that opening. It was amazing, and it just changed up everything. And I realized, wow, that's what's been going on with me for the last few months, and that's why my life had gotten a little bit dreary and dull, and I'm kind of like searching for meaning type of feeling again, tapping into it even now, just thinking about it. But there's that inner buoyancy is there also to dissolve whatever's remaining through awareness, right? Because what is that inner doldrum? What is that residue? That is resistance. It's resistance that closes our heart. It's resistance that makes us withhold our love. It's resistance that creates anxiety, as we're going to discover. It really is the source of so much pain. It's a source of depression for a lot of people. When we begin to examine it in its most fundamental functioning, we can really begin to dissect it, take it apart so that we can recognize it much more easily. Because as we recognize it as just resistance and not some giant imaginary problem that we can't even quite put our finger on, it's just limitless. Every time you uncover a new facet about this problem, there's 20 more attached to it. The rabbit hole never ends. We could just go down, and the source of, the source of resistance and the story of resistance and the stories of suffering, they just go on forever. You can never fix yourself on the level of story in a way that's permanent. However, as we discover the connection between resistance and suffering directly, and we begin to sever that link, we can do our work where it really counts, which is on the level of resistance. Having severed the story of suffering, now what we're doing is we're just dealing with a feeling instead of a mountain of, history and all the pieces and problems that we imagine are connected to everything. It's overwhelming. It's a lot to deal with. You try to fix your story, you'll never, there's no way. In any case, the story has an end. The end of your life. Then what? Then you create a story of a future life, an afterlife. Yes, and that can give you some solace. But you won't know for sure till you get there. This is a way of dealing with what's real here and now, which is the resistance that you're feeling inside. And as I want to just reiterate again, resistance is what's limiting our capacity. The energy is coming in, the energy is coming up, the energy of consciousness is arising within us. And that's kind of what I wanted to allude to in the last video, is that this source of energy that we're dealing with is consciousness. Now, we can look at all sorts of different ways that this principle will uphold on the levels of physics and on the levels of emotion, on the levels of mental blocks and things like that. When we encounter resistance, it blocks our flow, it inhibits us. And oftentimes, we encounter resistance, we push back, and that creates more resistance. So we think that the problem, if energy minus resistance equals capacity, well then if I just add resistance, right, I have a minus resistance, if I just plus resistance, then that will cancel it out. But no, you can't force your way out of resistance. It doesn't work. And if you add resistance to it, that's all you're doing, is just adding more resistance. Resistance has a negative quality to it as it is. That's why when I was understanding this as an equation, it came out that way, as energy minus resistance. It also makes sense because if we're dealing with a certain finite energy source, we can understand that the resistance is what would subtract from it and deliver the capacity. However, as I was just alluding to, the consciousness that I really want to focus on in this exploration is consciousness. The energy source is consciousness. That's the one that I want to focus on because I believe that it is infinite. And in my direct experience, it is limitless and inexhaustible. So I can't prove yet that it's infinite, but I am highly suspicious that it may be. But at the very least, in all intents and purposes, it may as well be infinite because it's inexhaustible, at least while it is. So consciousness is the energy that's coming into the system. And as I decrease and let go of resistance, my capacity for consciousness, my awareness increases. The greater awareness I have, the greater power I have, the greater ability that I will have, the greater understanding that I will have, the greater wisdom that I will have. So I will know where to focus my energy, where to focus my actions and things that will have the greatest effect. You think about it too, you could have, let's say you have, 10 hours to get something done. Well, you can work really, really hard in ways that are going to be ineffective. Or I think Einstein said something like this, if I have an hour to solve the problem and the whole world depends on it, I will spend 59 minutes examining it. He said something like that. I'll questioning it, and then I'll spend the last minute executing the solution, because once you understand it at a deep enough level, the solution is simple. It's obvious. So it's about that understanding. It's about that awareness, right? You see? So this is all making sense. I hope so. I'm understanding this at even deeper levels as I'm sharing it, so that it's great. Nonetheless, as I was talking about this with one of my friends, I'm going to wrap it up here, but I want to give you the tidbit that I promised about how to shift out of resistance very quickly and powerfully in a massive way. But real quick, touch on some of the sources of resistance that we can look for and find in our lives. So anytime we're feeling like a victim, anytime we're feeling like that's resistance big time. Anytime we're feeling judgmental, that's also resistance. So I'll give examples. Like if we're feeling victimized, then we have a resistance towards the way we're perceiving things to be. That things were that way or they are that way, we don't like it. So there's resistance. Anytime we don't like something, we're resisting it. So people say real quick, someone says, well, what about terrible things? And you're supposed to like them too? Well, you don't have to love them, but is your not liking them actually helping the problem? No, it's shutting down your heart, shutting down your whole system, shrinking your consciousness, giving you limited options, rather than if you open to it and accept it, that this is what is. It may not be a great thing, right? But I can open to it and accept that it is. Then that gives me the greatest power to affect change in a positive way. So, if we're feeling like a victim, we've shrunken our ability to deal with and cope with the situation. Another compulsive thinking. Anytime we're in compulsive thinking, that generates resistance. It generally circles and revolves around problematic types of thinking, looking for problems and such. And of course, that just adds to the overall backlog of resistance that is in the system. Anytime we're just ruminating everything, the gears are just turning, and it's just creating resistance in the body. You can feel it in your body, and that's the main thing about resistance. Is by becoming aware of it, it short circuits a couple things. You can really detach and unhook from thinking awareness and go right into the feeling, which that is one of the most powerful ways that we're going to begin to dissolve it. Because once you see it and you see, okay, wherever this resistance is coming from, understand that if you're feeling suffering of any kind, what you're feeling is resistance in the body. There has to be resistance for you to have suffering. A couple things for you to have suffering. You have to have a story of a self. You have to have some kind of story that's being generated, that's being continuously linked to the feeling. And that is your story of suffering. If you don't have a story of suffering, then you can't have suffering. You only have feelings. You just have the visceral just the feel, the sensory data, if you will. It's not personal. If you say ow, what is that? Well, there's a sharp, you know, feeling there. Feels like something's poking. Now that's the visceral pain. But when you start to say, why is this happening to me? I've had this for like 3 days now. It won't go away. Now you're starting to create suffering around it. Right? That's the mental story. We're telling ourselves what it means to have that feeling. What does that feeling mean? Oh, it might be cancer. It might be something terrible. Maybe it's something that the doctors did to me. Now I'm starting to feel like a victim. Now it's more resistance. I'm angry. Those people, they shouldn't treat people like that. Now I'm judgmental. More resistance. Building up, building up, building up. And all the while, I think that this is empowering me. And, they shouldn't do this. And, what are we? But really, all I'm doing is I'm limiting my consciousness and I'm shrinking my capacity. I'm getting maybe full of myself in an egotistical way, and I'm feeling, my ego is feeling empowered. Yeah. But when I actually go to engender support for my idea, I just encounter more resistance. Nobody wants to get involved. No one wants to engender community around someone who's berating them. And I don't know if you've ever noticed, but it's just not really pleasant to work with people who are exhibiting a massive amount of resistance buildup. And we've all been around these people. We've all been those people at different times. So when I'm like that, I do my best to recognize and say, I need to go be by myself for a little while. I need to chill out and release, let some of this go, because anything I say right now, it's not going to be good. It's going to come off the wrong way. I'm going to end up, insulting someone, not even on purpose, just or being mean without wanting to. I know that's just the energy starts coming up and the words start coming out. You're like, oh man, I didn't mean to say that at all. I didn't mean to, I didn't mean to act that way. I didn't mean to say it that way. That's a lot of what it is too. It's like you know that's what you said. It's what you meant, but you didn't need to say it with that energy behind it, and in such a fashion, because that's what was harmful. And that was the resistance was the source of it. Again, if I had let go of that resistance, then I would just been able to put in. Would have been able to present that idea very clearly and concisely and in a friendly way. All right, there's the timer telling us, oh, life calls. I knew I was going to forget to silence that. All right, well, we're in an imperfect world here. I guess we'll just go ahead and check it out. Well, I'm glad that we had, take a moment to. Yeah. Oh, good. Now, all right. I once saw a guy do an interview. He had to clear his throat so badly, and he just talked for about 20 minutes. The whole time, you could just oh my God, dude, just clear your throat, please. Just stop for 2 seconds, and please just clear your throat. I don't want to hear that. It was the worst. All right, so anyways. And we're back. So no, I'm good. I'm glad that we had that little pause, that little interruption, because it reminded me of one thing that I did not mention that's critical about resistance, is that it is always, in every case, linked to fear. If we find fear, we will find resistance at its core every single time. And this is so critical. It's a major, major source of inhibition for people, of stopping them from expressing who they are. Now, of course, some people say, well, you have to have certain inhibitions in place, otherwise people will just go wild, but as we found in every case, the more we try to oppress people and force them to fall in line from the outside, it just creates a feeling of being trapped and controlled. And there's all sorts of that is the way that they control us. But if we want to break free, into the consciousness arena, which is much more empowering than being manipulated by sources which have at their aims controlling you into being a good consumer. If you want to break free of that, then hey, consciousness awakening is going to be necessary. Consciousness expansion is going to be necessary. And fear is a major tool that these entities will utilize to coerce people into behaving in ways that benefit them overall, instead of necessarily maybe benefiting you. So we want to be aware of these things. And also, you just as a person, you want to be able to express yourself, the truth of who you are, at a depth of reality that is authentic to you, that feels good, that feels right. You want to be empowered to do that. You want to have the capacity to do all of that and creatively express yourself in that way. I mean, that is what we're all really wanting to do, I feel. Whether we're creative types or we're just, we're whatever our bent is, whatever our passions are, we want to be able to live our lives in such a way as it's expressing our authentic inner nature. And we can't do that when we're in fear. When we're constantly in fear, it limits us and it inhibits us. And in every case, its source can be found in resistance. Now, this is very, very empowering and enlightening news, because most people think that we need to fix the story involved, again, to get out of the fear. We need to somehow rearrange the story of our lives, or, who our character is in our heads. We have to think of ourselves as someone who is fearful and go from that way of thinking to thinking about ourselves in a way as, oh, now I'm someone who overcame my fears. But again, that's only going to affect us on the mental level, and it's still at the level of story. It's not ultimately going to be freeing. It's better. It's definitely better than not doing it. Okay, anything we can do to overcome our fears or to stretch ourselves beyond is going to be helpful. But some ways are a lot more effective, and if what we're aiming at is a real radical consciousness revolution, a true awakening, then that's what we want to focus our aims on. So fear, how does fear get put into place? So let's think about it. Now let's see. I have something I want to do that's going to stretch me beyond my limitation. Let's say I want to go ask, someone who's in a position of power for a job, or more money, let's say. And okay, so now automatically maybe I'm feeling this pushback. What if they say no? I don't want to look foolish. This is all the story. This is where the story starts to hook into that resistant feeling, anything that's already there, and then it will also generate more resistance the more we think about it. So I'm just using this as one example. You can think of anything that in particular that triggers fear in you. Just think about it for a moment. Put yourself in that position and start to call up some of that inner resistance that's connected to it. Now, the key is that when it happens in the moment, you do this enough times and you'll start to recognize when you feel fear, when you feel suffering of any kind, it will start to trigger this response, awareness. So now, instead of hey, how's it going, my friend? I had a good friend going through some shit there, so I knew he was in need of talking to and talking with. So anyways, but going through some shit happens sometimes in life. I mean, he's going through a difficult time. Somebody did him wrong, fucked him over. It apparently seems unwarranted. He's questioning karma. What is the point of this? How could this be? This is bullshit. And he's in a very emotional state, I should say. He was starting to come out of it by the end of the conversation. So that was good. But nonetheless, I tried to even steer this direction. I tried to steer the line of discussion towards resistance and his own inner resistance to the situation to see if he could start to free himself of that. Because even though, generally the tendency is to want to take sides with this person. And yeah, I know they shouldn't have done that you were wrong, blah, blah, blah. And, maybe that's what a good friend does sometimes when it's necessary. But if the person's able to hear it, I think what's more effective in the long run, for sure, is for them to just take a look at where their own resistance is feeding the problem. Because there's the thing. We think mistakenly, as I've already started to allude to, that if we fix the story of our life, if we can arrange the pieces in a certain way and hold everything together, then we'll be okay. But we're dealing in completely the external, which we have very, very little control over. And we know that no matter what, all life is ephemeral. I mean, that's the whole point of the mandala, is these, they create these incredible structures knowing that it's all going to be pointless tomorrow when the winds wash them away. But it wasn't pointless because they got to execute a high degree of skill and create beauty. And they also reinforce the idea that they know nothing is lasting. So you just appreciate life from moment to moment in all its myriad appearances. So, in any case, nonetheless, though, but we do have to face challenging times. And what I tried to get him to see is that when we are in a state where we're feeling victimized, our perspective is very limited and narrow, and it's going to be hard to come up with good solutions, effective ways of dealing and counteracting with the situation. We're probably going to make things worse through our resistance, like throwing fuel in the fire. It's like, um, the mother can't get the teenage child to listen. I mean, this is a true story. There's been plenty of stories like this. So at her end of her wits, she decides to call the police, and the police come, and on their way and storming into the house, they end up shooting the child and killing him. Now the mother's like, oh, well, damn, I certainly compounded that problem. Now that's not to take a stab at anyone in particular. That's just a way of exemplifying this process. Is sometimes we can try to control the situation and we end up making it way far, far worse than it was had we just accepted and be like, okay, this is shitty. I'm going to have to deal with this. But we pour fuel on the fire, and resistance is one of those ways. We have to look at the sources of it, because when we're in a fear state, we're highly resistant. Our perspective shrinks down very narrowly. We're not able to see effective solutions. I mean, I think Einstein was quoted as saying something like, and maybe paraphrasing, but it's something like that: you cannot solve a problem on the same level of mind that created it. And so, at this level of the game, what we're seeing is that all these problems exist in the mind. But if we can't solve them at the level of mind, that means we need to get out of our minds. We need to find a way to snap and detach and unhook from this continuous stream of thought that's telling us a story of suffering. We got to find a way to snap out of that and unhook. Otherwise, we're still at that level of mind. If we're trying to solve the problem from that level, it's never going to happen. And even if we do manage to get the pieces in place for a moment, it's soon going to be gone. And we're going to use all of our resources and all of our energy at trying to maintain it and keep it together. But I don't think that's a very effective way of going about it. And it also definitely causes us to feel enormously stressed, tense, and not at ease and not at peace, and feeling like we need to control everything and like we are totally out of control. Feeling like we're an enemy with things around us and the world at large. I would much rather come from a place of harmony and community and flow, and allowing that energy to manifest and being supportive of that, and also looking for resolutions to situations and problems and challenges that are beneficial to all. Ideally, that's what I'd like to do. And sometimes maybe you cannot in the moment, but you always strive your best. That's the practice. That's just like Aikido. At the highest level of Aikido, no one should ever be injured. But if you aren't a master in Aikido and you're being attacked by 3 people, but you know some things, you could probably really hurt some of those people. Stop yourself from getting hurt. And maybe if you were practicing at a higher level of that art, you would have been able to diffuse the situation with no physical violence. But we got to do the best we can from where we're at. And we also, number one, we have to protect ourselves. So it's certainly no judgment on wanting to preserve one's life in whatever ways one has the means to. But here's the thing: it's just we should be striving, I think. If we have an evolutionary consciousness minded bent, then we should be always striving to greet situations from the highest level that we are able to muster and understand, from a highest understanding. So we can't just go around being like, well, I know it's better to not solve my problems with violence, but I get really pissed off, so fuck it, I'm just gonna beat my spouse, because I get really angry. It's like, no, you have to better. If you know better, then you have to at some point say to yourself, it doesn't matter what she does or what she says. I can't blame her. She's not forcing me to strike her or to yell at her or abuse her in any way. And at the same time, she's not forcing you to stay in that relationship. So if there are triggers and if ways that you're being treated which are totally unacceptable, that are to you that don't feel right, then it's up to you to leave that relationship, not to try to change that person through force. That's just like we were talking about before with the whole societal pressures and things, trying to change things from the outside. It doesn't work, and it creates a limitation of freedom of expression and a limitation of our capacity, and and all sorts of other horrible things that we could just we'd go on forever trying to talk about them all. But nonetheless, the main thing is, the point I'm making is that we must have this inner revolution, this inner understanding, and then we must do our best to strive to live from that understanding. We can only make excuses for so long before we got to say, you know what? Shit, I got to stop blaming. I have to stop resisting and telling myself this story of victimhood, because that's not going to get me anywhere. That's just going to keep me a victim forever. It's just going to keep building up the feeling of being more and more victimized until finally I'm just ready to lash out. Now I become the aggressor. You know, but the whole problem could have been resolved had I learned to let go of resistance. So for a next couple minutes, I'd just like to talk about that really quick to give you guys a takeaway for yourselves to be able to work with this, because hopefully I've made a good enough case, at least to start to get you to think about resistance in your own life, where you're resisting and where you might be holding on to resistance, and where you might be meeting the world, you know, head on with aggression, where perhaps a softer approach would be better, or at least freeing yourself of the feeling of being separate and having enemies. Because ultimately, from a non-dual perspective in consciousness, everything is one. So if you're seeing things as an enemy, we are not seeing the truth. We're being deluded by what's appearing and by our story of separation. So freedom feels good. Freedom feels way better than being lost in a story of suffering where there's no way out. Even if you finally manage to get the pieces together, they crumble. That's not the way to live. That's not a life worthy of you. So start to think about these things. But in the meantime, also, when you notice resistance coming up, or if you're ballsy enough to go looking for it, because you want to try this experiment and see if, in fact, well, will my capacity increase if I let go of resistance? I don't know. You know what? That's for you to determine. Ultimately, you have to try this out for yourself and see what happens, because me talking about it is only to convince you to try it for yourself. That's the only value and merit it has in it. Otherwise, I mean, I'm not up here tooting my own horn. This is my ideas about everything and listen to how great it is. No, it's to convince you to, maybe he's onto something. Let me check. Let me try that. Let me see for myself. What happens if I let go of resistance? How does that make me feel? Does it change my decisions? Does it change my felt sense of awareness? Does it change the freedom of creative expression that I feel in my life? Is it bringing up things that are difficult and challenging, but that are also causing me to grow and expand my awareness? So let's look at some of these things. But first, when the resistance comes up, when you're able to bring it up, the idea is there's a story of suffering attached to it, and then there's just the resistant feeling. And what we want to go with is just focusing on the resistant feeling. Anytime the mind was to come back in with a story and start to, well, yeah, but they did this and it wasn't fair, we just don't focus on that. We just unhook from that and just go down into the feeling, wherever we feel it most viscerally in the body, and just allow our attention to rest on it. It's uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable. You're encountering your resistance and you're not running away from it to thought, to try to escape. You're actually just going into it, and you have to be bold and be brave, okay? You have to have at least a little bit of bravery, a little bit of courage. We all have it. You already have it. You just have to access it, okay? So just allow yourself to contact that resistance and expand to it and soften to it as best you can. Just gently allow your awareness to rest on it, on that resistance, and start to explore the quality of it a little bit. Allow your awareness to be immersed in it. In this way, you see, it's like when you're out near a pool on a cold day, and some obnoxious person is splashing water everywhere, and you're like, you're resisting, or if somebody's coming at you with squirt guns, oh my God, you resist that cold feeling, or you're stepping into a cold shower for the first minute, you're like, oh God, but once you're fully immersed, once you're in there, you're fully wet, you're fully immersed, you're in the pool, there's no more resistance. You let that resistance go. Now you're fully wet, you're fully immersed. And the resistance starts to dissolve. It dissolves very naturally on its own, very easily, because you've accepted it. You've accepted whatever that stimulus is. You realize there's no escaping it. So in this way, the escape was going into the mind to think about it, mull it over, or try to solve it and all that stuff. But you're not going to do that. You're going to stay with the feeling, or to make excuses, or to blame, to justify, to make yourself a victim, to make yourself right, to be the right one, to figure out ways to punish that person, or to figure out ways to rectify the situation, to make sure that this never happened. And whatever, not saying that anything is wrong with that way of thinking, but what I'm saying is that that's not effective for what we're doing. We want to sever the link in the resistance, our inner resistance, because intelligent awareness is smart enough to make intelligent decisions for us. We don't need resistance to have us do the right things. And the resistance only gets in the way. Remember, the resistance only limits our capacity. So we go into it gently as best we can and allow yourself to feel where is that separation? Where is the link between you and the resistance? Check to see where you feel there's a me here and then there's a resistance feeling there. See if you can contact that at all. Just becoming aware of this resistance in various ways. To explore it. Like I said, explore it. Use, your own creative ability and intelligence to just kind of explore, where is this resistance coming from? You might have an insight spontaneously. Oh, you know what? This is linked to that. This memory was triggered up, and then, all this emotion comes rushing up, but you're present for it, and you're not tying it into a story of suffering or poor me or any of that kind of stuff. But you're just present with the feeling. The feeling, it gets intense. Might get intense for a little bit, but then it dissolves. And what you've done is you've just freed that amount of resistance out of the system. That amount of resistance has now been dissolved, and your capacity has instantly also increased because of the direct relationship between resistance and capacity. Oh, I see now. Now Walter is downstairs, yapping at the traffic. How dare people drive by? Ah, yes. The joys of owning a dog. All right, so nonetheless, so I could resist that, right? I told you to shut up. What's wrong with you? I told you to shut up. Make myself crazy and stressed out, or I could just accept it. And once I accept it, then I can choose to go down and take him out of the window. Say, no, your duty is over for now, Lorta. You can take a break. Don't need you to watch the neighborhood right now. Anyway, so yes, life happens. It'll bring up things, and when it does, and you start to notice yourself resisting, feel how that resistance is your reaction to the situation, and notice how it's going to be tied to a story if it continues, and you're gonna sever that link. Focus on the feeling, and just allow yourself to become more aware. Just expand your awareness and explore that resistance in various ways. One of the things that might help as a visual is the principle of negative resistance. When I first I was playing around with this idea of this equation, testing it, I was trying to solve it. If the energy minus resistance equals capacity, then, well, how do I get rid of that negative? So it's E minus R equals C. Well, if I want to get rid of the negative, I add the positive, right? So if I add resistance, then that should cancel that resistance out. But then I realized, no, that doesn't work. You can't just add resistance. That's just more resistance. So that's what we normally do. We get a situation, we don't like it, and we are like, oh, yeah, I don't like it. Well, yeah, I'm not going to like it even more than you. And I'm going to resist even harder until I get my way. And that doesn't actually make us feel good. It doesn't engender friendship and cooperation and community. It creates stress in the body, which is making us sick. And it's training in a very ineffective strategy for handling situations in life that come up. So a better way that I'm suggesting, that we're testing, is to come at it from a more expanded capacity. And more expanded capacity means I have more resources available. It means I have more options available, right? So bullying my way through the situation starts to seem to be, that's actually like the least effective way of dealing with it. I mean, that's the way we've been dealing with it in the past. I know that's a lot of ways people are still dealing with this today, But we can see that if resistance, bullying around, with inner or outer, beating ourselves up or attacking the world, is limiting us, is the opposite of what we want. See, the more we start to get that, then it's just the awareness starts to take over and take care of it for us. We no longer will meet those situations with so much resistance and anger and stress and tension, because we'll see, oh, every time I do that, I'm actually just shrinking my ability to deal with it. So why would I do that unless I was very unintelligent? You see, we'll do it over and over again, but we're not complete idiots. Eventually, we wake up. We see it enough times. We're good at recognizing patterns. It's one of the things that kept humans alive for so long, apparently, is our pattern recognition ability. So this happens enough times, and if we're alert to it, that's the key. When it happens and we're in a state of awareness and consciousness, then it's going to change very quickly. And that's the benefit of doing this practice and about looking and examining our inner resistances this way, because we can create drastic, powerful change in our lives. We can create momentum. We can start to dissolve these things that have been holding us back, and we grow in exponential ways at orders of magnitude that would have been impossible to surmount were we dealing with our own resistance along the way. You see, that's the thing. It's our own self up against us. We are up against our own self. When we see it this way, it's very empowering. Now, suddenly, the wall is only as high as I make it, really, because however high it is, I will rise to the situation. Life will rise to the situation. It always does. And I will do my best. But if I am adding resistance to it, I'm raising the wall. I'm actually making it harder for myself. So, again, start to look for this. Just start to become aware of it, because that's the key. It's going to be the key to making you shift, to making this shift for yourself, and for starting to understand ways in which you create habitually resistance in your own life, and how it's limiting you in whatever it is that your creative expression is, and also your day-to-day felt sense of well-being. I mean, when we are loaded up with resistance, it is not an empowering state. There are much higher states. Now, it may feel empowering if we have been depressed. It may feel like, because there's a range to emotions. Anger has more energy than depression, for sure. But again, it's still not a very effective way of dealing with things when you can come from a state of courageousness. Now see, I see the resistance, and instead of attacking it, which is anger, I accept it. I face it. It takes courage to face it. But then now I'm operating from a whole different level. Now I don't have an enemy. Now I haven't created an enemy, let's say that. So even if someone is being an enemy towards me, I haven't created an additional layer of enmity between us, because of my willingness, my courageousness, my love. So these are the higher principles that we will operate from as we begin to let go of resistance very naturally. It can definitely help us see the map, though. So courageousness, acceptance, peace, these are higher level states of awareness, or modes of being, that when we learn to access and to become our natural felt state, and our identity begins to shift to, instead of a victim, a person, a limited being, we just start to embody these qualities of love and peacefulness and compassion. We really just become those qualities. That becomes our felt sense. And we still have our personalities, of course. We still have our unique, we're all unique expressions of divinity. So the more we transcend those lower levels of emotional turmoil, and they're held in place and maintained by the suffering story and the resistance to life and the resistance to ourselves and all that resistance we've been talking about, the more we free ourselves to expand into a higher state. So our felt sense from day to day is just better, and we're also much more capable of meeting the tasks at hand. We're much more capable expressions of creativity. We're much more capable of growth, of all the higher qualities: compassion, love, freedom of expression, communication, community, friendship, all the qualities that are dear to us, love. We begin to just express naturally, exemplify. That wasn't a sentence. I'm feeling it. I'm just feeling the love, flowing it out. So yeah, anyways, that's pretty much going to do it. I guess it's going to wrap it up for this one. So just a couple things real quick. If you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and hit the little subscribe button. I'm trying to remember to cue people into that, because that way you can get notified of any new videos that come out, and you can kind of stay in the conversation. And also, yeah, just to recap, keep in mind that energy is the source. Consciousness is the source. It is infinite. It ultimately has become everything. And what we're doing by letting go of resistance is we're ultimately returning to source consciously. We've been at the opposite end. We've been in the realm of 3D, in the objective world, and now we're kind of pulling back our perspective to see that the objective world is contained within this larger reality, which is not different from what we are, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool to realize experientially. Now it's still growing in me. This experience is still growing, and I hope it's still growing in you as well. And we can continue to discuss it and grow along the way together. But definitely don't take my word for it, but trust me. Enough to explore it for yourself. Resistance is going to be the number one inhibitor to your capacity as a being in any area. So start to let go, start to look for resistance in your life, and start to dissolve it in any ways that you can, encountering it with awareness. And start to see what changes that affects in your felt experience and in your external reality. I would love to hear about it and discuss it further. I'm going to keep doing the same thing because this is my laboratory right here. And I will see you guys on another video. Much love.